Today, we're going to talk about that, right? Your buyer's perspective. We're going to talk about a few best practices. I'm going to share some frameworks with y'all that you can use. You submitted a few questions as well. And so I want to make sure that I dig into some of those things. My favorite being the regional differences that pop up within emails, and like people always ask about that. But and then last, certainly not least, we'll jump into like live email examples, and I'll have Izzy pull those up and we go through them. So with that, let's start with a quick question of how did decision makers manage their inbox? I think of this question very simply, which is really how you manage your inbox. If you're using a tool like a SalesLoft or an Outreach or any sort of cadencing tool, you basically set yourself up to manage your inbox like a to-do list, right? And your buyer is doing the same thing. The problem is they don't have that clever technology. They are, just sort of thrown into it, and they're trying to manage external vendors, internal projects. They're trying to talk to, pretty much everyone that they can and like get a hold of everyone. And at the same time, they've got a ton of inbound email coming in. It's no surprise, they get a lot of cold emails. And so one of the things you have to recognize how they've adapted to that is how they actually behave when they read email. And so one of the core things to that is actually how much time they're going to spend reading your writing. The average amount of time that you spend reading an email is about 10 seconds. Same thing for your buyers, right? And the thing that I always like to point out is what's going on in that 10-second window, right? If you're thinking about a 10-second window, how many words can you really read? Well, you can read about 40. And what that tells us is people aren't actually reading what you're sending them. They are not reading, they're categorizing. They're asking themselves the question of what is this message? And so while you've put together this really thought-provoking, helpful piece of, phrasing, right, about like what you do and all this great stuff, problem is they immediately categorize it as mental spam, right? They're just like, okay, I know what that is. It's a sales email. I don't necessarily need to engage with it. And they move on, right? Let's see, like Teddy, since you chimed in earlier, if I'm writing you an email and the subject line says, Teddy, comma, want to 2x your positive reply rate, question mark, or question mark. Teddy, what do you think is inside that email before you've even opened that email?
Yeah, you're trying to sell me some stuff.
Yeah, and your buyer thinks the same thing. There's actually some really easy things to avoid in your subject lines. First names are an easy one. The only people who use first names in subject lines are marketers. There's awesome data around the fact that first names within a subject line will pop your open rates up. But here's the deal. SalesLoft did a deep dive analysis on that. And while it opens more emails, your reply rate goes down about 20%. That is 1 in 5 people that were going to reply to you didn't, because you said their name in the subject line. So it's an easy thing to fix, right? The other things to start avoiding are like positive or negative tonalities. We'll dig into this a little bit more later. You don't want to say like struggling or better. You want to keep it really neutral. Then the other piece here is punctuation, question marks. The question mark is actually going to reduce your chance of getting an open about 50%. And so with that, we have to recognize that 1, these patterns are always evolving, but 2, like you're not going to get a response if you don't get an email opened, right? So we'll dig in on some subject line stuff in a little bit, but this sort of brings me to the next one, which is the cliches. Cliches are things like, I hope this finds you well. I think we've all seen a like automated message at this point that says like, I hope you're like safe and well during these times, right? But what about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 27 minutes, right? I immediately know you're asking for time on my calendar. What about just checking in on this note, right? Like there's certain phrases that only sellers use, and we have to start thinking through those and avoiding them. One of my favorites is "my name is." Why do you need to introduce yourself? It's in your signature line. It's in your email. You don't need it. And so when you're reaching out to someone, and by the way, there's a very clear reason why sellers do this, right? It's cold call training. When you pick up the phone, you call someone, right? "Hi, my name is Lewis," right? They're going to be like, "Okay, you just answered a fundamental question for me that I have to ask myself when I pick up the phone, which is, who is this stranger that called me?" Right? They don't have that same question when you're reaching out in an email. And when we talk about personalization in a second, we're going to answer what the fundamental question is, but it's not who is this, it's what is this. Length. So, all right, I could send y'all a really long email and you probably won't read it, right? I don't need to like really dive deep on that one. We've all rolled our eyes at a really long internal note. Buzzwords. This kind of gets back to that fundamental question of what is this? Sellers are really good at sending marketing emails. They're really good at writing marketing copy. And the problem is when I'm scanning through my inbox really fast, I don't know what any of those words actually mean. Nothing is concrete in my mind. And so some things to avoid when you're writing your messaging are like, I'll give an example of what we do, right? Because y'all all probably do different things. Lavender. If I'm reaching out to a sales manager and they're hiring new sales reps, maybe I want to talk about the visibility that teams get across their inboxes. Here's the problem. What does visibility mean? What is visibility? Well, it could mean activity. It could mean maybe I'm reading your emails. None of those things are true though. And so the problem is I'm opening it up way too wide. The reader has to think, and they're not going to think when they're reading your email. And so instead, what we would say is you can see what's working across your team's inboxes. That's much more concrete. It's much more simple, and it's easier to understand than using a buzzword like visibility. Now, educating, I see this all the time. It's where people take it comes in two flavors. I'll talk about flavor one first. This is where people take the challenger sale and they like totally butcher it. And they show up and they start like just talking at their buyer. Your emails are not supposed to inform the person on the other end. They're supposed to get them curious enough to respond. And so when you start talking at them, recognize that they want to be talked with. An informative tone. We've done this analysis across millions of emails. An informative tone is going to reduce your chance of getting a response by about 26%. And so that shows up as you talking about yourself and all your features. And it shows up as you saying something like, yeah, as you may know, buyers have been receiving 2 times the amount of emails, yet reply rates have plummeted by almost 39% in the past 2 years. Right? You're like snooze fest. All of a sudden you're checked out, right? As opposed to me trying to have a conversation with you like, hey, I've been having a ton of conversations with sales leaders. Curious if you're seeing this too. With it becoming harder to get a hold of reps, right? Like I'm trying to have a conversation versus just talking at you, is really what I'm going at. The last one here I want to note on is formatting. So if I asked you all to pick up your phone and wave it at the screen, come on, there it is. It's not far away, right? We use our phone as a notification hub as we go about our day-to-day. It is where your email is 8 times more likely to have its first read. 8 times more likely. You're 3 times more likely to send an email from a computer, and they're 8 times more likely to view it on their phone. Problem is, a ton of sales teams are not even doing that. They're designing their emails in a Google Doc, right? And so what we have to recognize is there is a fundamental difference in how those emails are going to appear. And that has a massive impact on your response rates. About 82% more replies happen when you optimize for a mobile view. 82%, it's almost double just by like breaking up your paragraphs. And it comes down to the buyer's experience. And just to put a bow on this, I want to make sure we talk about follow-up emails as well as we talk about the buyer's experience. I see a lot of sellers mess up this mindset around why they're reaching out. And it shifts. Like I talk about cold email all the time. People start doing the right things. And then like the follow-ups, it's just like it all goes out the door. And one of the things you have to remember is you are writing a cold email. Your only goal, the only goal is to get a response. It doesn't matter if it's email 1 or email 17. I kind of hope you're not doing 17 emails, but that's okay. The only goal is to get a response. And what I see happen is like reps start to have a conversation with themselves. And it's okay to repeat yourself. It's okay to come back to the same fundamental truth of why you showed up in their inbox in the first place. Why? Well, because they're not thinking about you anytime between email 1, email 2, email 3, email 4. They might maybe start to recognize your name, but they're not like actively thinking to themselves, oh, Sean Ryan, he's getting back to me later today. I can't wait. I'm going to see like this case study that he promised me in email 2. Like I'm going to dig in as soon as he sends that up. They don't think about that, right? And so every time you follow up and you keep like, removing them further and further from the context of why you're there, you are losing your chance of getting that conversation started. And so I'll quote a wonderful sales leader, Ellie Emerson, who quoted it perfectly to me as your job is to create curiosity, build it, maintain it, and never satisfy it. I love this because as soon as like the buyer thinks they know what they need to know, they're gone. And we actually see this in reply data too. So after the reply, one of the number one reasons that your prospect starts ghosting you is because you don't ask questions. If I'm reaching out and I say, got you excited about Lavender, cold email, and you're like, oh, cool, how does it integrate with Salesforce? And oh man, I just go into like seller mode and I'm just like telling you all the cool ways that we integrate. I got a response. This is amazing. And they're like, cool, I got my information. And then they're gone, right? They don't need to respond to that, right? They understand how it integrates. They don't need to know. Whereas if I just responded back and I said, oh, why do you ask? Right? All of a sudden now I'm getting more information. I'm learning more. I can have a better answer for why they use Salesforce, but I'm also getting them curious, right? Well, why? Why does it matter, right? Is there something special about the way you integrate with Salesforce that I need to know? And really all I'm trying to get at when I ask the question is like, is that where you're sending emails? But the point is I'm keeping dialogue. So in summary, it's about having empathy for this person on the other side, right? And if you're trying to find a way to just put this into practice, does this look like something you'd actually want to read if it came from a stranger, right? You kind of have to get outside yourself a little bit, but like, is this truly something that you would engage with? So let's do a quick download on what makes for a good email, right? What are those things that you would want to probably reply to? Well, we'll start with the subject line and we'll move through to the topic of personalization. So a killer subject line, this is my framework. Some people have different ones, is one that feels like it was crafted by somebody inside the company. And the reason I feel that way is not because I'm trying to be deceptive, right? I'm not saying camouflage, like sneak your way into their inbox. I'm saying be boring, be like, how do I avoid that mental spam filter that I just spent all that time talking about, right? How do I stay away from that? I got to be boring. I got to use these like no positive, negative tones. I'm just like talking about the topic. If you're looking for what this subject line is going to do, it's going to literally just tell them this is what this email is about. That's it. It's like super boring. nothing special. And if they already know your company, say they talked to your company in last April, right? Do yourself a favor and just put the company name right before, right? So I'd be like, Lavender template revision. Of course, I can't type on this, but you'd just be like Lavender template revision versus like just saying template revision. And the reason being is they know your name and they'll have that recognition. So anything that's like in funnel for me, by the way, I do this way because I know the way that my buyer is going to triage their inbox is they're going to look for names and threads that they recognize. One of the most effective ways to start your email is by starting with a name that they know, right? If I'm emailing Sean and I start my email with, hey, Sean, I was talking to Izzy about ... Man, he's going to open that email. I have no doubts, right? Whereas, if I start with Sean, as you may know, in 2020, blah, 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 right? Like that becomes much different. We'll talk about that preview text as we talk about personalization. So let's talk about number one killer for response rates. It's the complexity of your writing. And that really comes down to the number of syllables that you're using within your text. All the samples you guys sent over, wonderful. You need to use smaller paragraphs, choppier sentences, and less jargon. All of them, every single one. And the reason I can tell you that without even having them pulled up is because 70% of emails are written at or beyond a 10th grade reading level. Now, I can read at a 10th grade reading level. You can read at a 10th grade reading level. Your buyer can read at a 10th grade reading level. It doesn't even matter what the persona is. They can all do it, right? Problem is they're flying through their inbox categorizing. And so this is why 3rd to 5th grade emails are winning right now. They are getting 68% more replies. It's why I take words like visibility and I replace them with a word like see. It's why I separate my paragraphs out. It's why I try to find commas within my writing and immediately try to cut them out. And so that's a huge piece, right? And yeah, this 10-second window also means you have to say less. The best reply rates right now are coming from emails under 50 words. Under 50 words. What do you talk about in under 50 words? I'll show you. But yeah, you start to think through, what am I going to cut from my writing? There's a lot of fluff that sits in your writing. Things like in order to could become too, talking a lot about yourself. You can probably not. The other like fun exercise that I'll give to y'all is, if you can't tweet the email, it probably needs to, have some things removed. And this is a really fun way to sort of get outside of your inbox and play with your copy. So highly recommend it. And what you find is like this force functioning, that red just like stands out, right? That force function is like, oh, what do I cut from this? What do I pull out of this writing? Now, mind you, both of these are fine emails, but the actual like process of pulling information out, being like, that can't go. Okay. Well, what can go? Well, how can I reword this? It's a very helpful way to think through what you're actually putting on paper. Okay. Quick note on formality. This is really more about the tone you take. It's about the mindset that you have. And the easiest way to describe it, my co-founder described it to me as veto to veto. Very important top officer to very important top officer. One of the immediate things that I ask you to do is you are solving a problem for your buyer. And they have that problem, right? You do your research. You know they have this problem, right? You don't need to like belittle yourself. You don't need to say you're a pest. You don't need to apologize. You are showing up with a valid reason to reach out. Act like it. I'm not saying that you need to be totally definitive in everything that you say, but the other piece to this, as I talk about formality, is the rules around email are starting to change. It's no longer appropriate to write an email almost like you would write a letter. We are moving into like, they're opening it here, right? They text all day on here. And so what you have to realize is like, hey, is that something that you would text? Yeah, you probably shoot a nice formal message back to buyers, and you probably get this all the time where they shoot you like one quick line of like poor grammar, like sure sounds cool, nothing's capitalized, and like it comes back really fast. That is a sign that your buyer is on their phone. It's a sign that your buyer is living in a modern time, and we need to start emailing that way. I also find that telling somebody to text a buyer versus telling somebody to email a buyer, if you were writing out your email and you were doing it in a text message thread, it would be half as long, it would be way simpler, and it wouldn't have half the amount of jargon in. The other piece is you would be focused on starting a conversation. How many times have y'all been sitting in a text thread and the person calls you and you sit there and you like cringe and die inside and you're like, I don't want to pick up the phone right now? We've all done it. I've done it. And like, you're just like, hey, I can't talk right now. Like, we can totally talk right now, but we don't want to. It's the exact same thing. And what I'm trying to get at here is a lot of times your buyer just doesn't want to get on the phone. And so treat the end goal of that text or that email as a conversation starter. Don't be afraid to have a conversation in written format. That's your only goal. Your only goal is to get a reply. So as we jump into personalization, which is in and of itself a best practice, remember, short, simple conversations over some sort of conversion. Yeah, personalized emails get twice the amount of replies. Awesome. Problem is people say, oh, it takes too long, or I don't really know what to do. We're just going to cover that. So we're going to talk about what it means to be relevant when we're reaching out. And we're going to talk about how to do it fast, because it should not take you a ton of time. What you're looking to do is formulate a point of view in a business, and you should have a formalized process for how you do that, and you do it really fast. So let's talk about personalization. Personalization does not mean personal. It's in the word, and so that's why people think it, but it doesn't mean personal, right? The fact that you like kayaking is cool, but what does that have to do with cloud infrastructure monitoring, like technology, right? And like, I appreciate the people who can wordsmith like fly fishing advice into like reasons for like cold email, and like, that's awesome. But I would much rather you focus your time, energy, and attention on the information that really says, hey, I think you have a problem and I can help, right? Now, one of the pieces of personal information that I am bullish on, and I actually really, really like, is their past experience. Because their past experience shapes how they are approaching the problems that they are facing today, right? If I work at a massive company and then I go work at a small company, that is going to shape how I approach problems. Or if I've only worked at small companies and now I'm at the biggest company I've ever been at, that is going to change how I'm approaching things, and maybe even my tolerance for checking out something that new. And so maybe it's a change in industry. You're either looking for contrast or similarities within their past experience, right? It may or may not even be something that you mention forthright in your first email. But when I see personal information and I see it done poorly, it's fluff. It's, I see you have X job title. I see you went to school in this particular place. Like, if you're not selling alumni software, what does that matter, right? So when you're thinking about personalization, I love this sentiment from Sam McKenna, which is you want them to feel as though you know them, right? You want them to walk away saying, this person understands my situation and my problems. All the credibility in the world is going to come from your personalization, not from what you do. And so when you're thinking about personalization, what you really are looking for is a valid reason to reach out to somebody. You need to answer why you are reaching out, because that is what they want to know. They want to know that you're not a robot and that you actually have a real reason for showing up today. It's not just to say, this is the cool stuff that I'm doing. And so one of the core things with that is you have to prime them to absorb that content, right? You have to set this up and meet them where they are. And one of the core pieces to that is it requires context. And so if I'm thinking about reaching out to somebody, I need to show them how I got there. And then I need to loop that into a problem or an insight that can be derived from that initial observation, right? So that typically looks something like, hey, I saw the following thing. I suspect you're looking into this other issue, right? It's not a hard and fast rule, but it tends to help. Hey, Will, looks like you're doing the following thing, or Izzy mentioned XYZ. Is this a big challenge for you right now? Usually when I talk to companies like X and Y, like, that's exactly what they're going through, right? What I'm doing is I'm showing up and saying, like, I've done a little bit of homework. Based on that homework, I can start to see some things. And one of the things to recognize is the more piece of information you pull in to that, overall puzzle of like a lot of people think of personalization as a checkbox, and it's not. They think about it as like, oh, I got my trigger, I'm going to go do my outreach. And like to a degree, you could probably get away with that. But if you really want to get replies, if you want to go above 30% response rates, you have to actually formulate a point of view in the business. And that means you have to run a process. You have to look across multiple observations and tie that into a congruent view on what's going on there. And that doesn't need to be time consuming, and it's not that hard. So I'm a huge fan of Kyle Coleman's 5x5 framework. You take 5 minutes to make that point of view come to light. You go through all your places, and then you can spend 5 minutes writing that email. Now, I'll tell you, his team spends about 6 minutes total. I know because they use our software. But the thing is like, when I ask you to write an email to Kyle, right? And assuming he's a relevant buyer for you, right? What does that actually mean? What are you doing in 5 minutes? This is where you have to formulate your process. This is where you have to ask, okay, what does my company do? What problems does that solve? Who am I solving that for right now? I'm solving it for Kyle. Kyle is a SVP of marketing. What does that mean for the problem? What does that mean for what we do? Okay, like that might change up some of my messaging that goes into that final email, but it also changes up the indicators that tell me that those core problems that I solve for exist. And so as I start to build my process, I want to start looking for where can I find those indicators? Where can I find the things like the team is growing, shrinking, they're expanding into new territories, they are struggling to get responses, they are integrating a new technology provider on XYZ, right? They just went through a merger. All sorts of things that I can point to that indicate very different problems. And maybe their past experience is a piece of that, right? What indicates that? But where do I go find them? And so when I pull up a SVP of marketing at a company like Clary, before I even know who Kyle is, I need to know where I'm going, in what order I'm going to it, what I'm looking for, and how I'm going to use it once I find it, right? You should go through your process and have a list of all the things that you find about an individual, and then be like, Okay, that's why I'm reaching out. That's all you need. Really, it's about having that click path down so you can just most quickly go through all of those resources. So that's kind of what I just went through. You know where you're going, you know what order you're going there, what you're looking for, and how you're going to use all that pieces of information that you find. So what's the outcome of that? You're making your buyers feel like you did your homework. You understand their situations and their problems, and you have a valid reason to show up and interrupt them. That's the outcome from running this process correctly. And so it's not about the basic school stuff. It's about what's actually going on in their day-to-day. So quick notes on cadence design and some email frameworks that y'all can take and run with today. So here's an example. Take it or leave it. I think of cadences as a sprint. Here's the deal. Your buyer knows when they're in a sequence. Your buyer knows when they are just like in this automated hellscape that is a sales loss cadence. They do. And they might not have words for it, but like they know what's going on. And so I'm not a huge fan of dragging out 18 touch points to an individual. Instead, I might look at that across an account. But if I'm thinking about my outreach across this cadence, that personalization element is going to trickle into every single touch point. Every single one. And here's why. The data shows I'm going to get more responses if I do that. It's that simple. I wouldn't do it if like didn't work, right? But you can do this at every single stage, and you can be that extra level of thoughtful, and you can just remind them of the context for why you showed up in the first place. So first touch, here's an easy framework that you can run with. This also works really well, by the way, for social touches, but you're just trying to generate dialogue. And what this taps into is almost like a Slack mentality of, oh yeah, that's priority, like quick answer kind of thing. And so it's a observation, and then instead of like going into that like insight or like challenge that you derive, you just immediately jump into a conversation starting question. So you just basically lobbed off the first half of your email. You just did only personalization as your email. And so, hey, George, saw you're growing the sales team by 20% this quarter. Would it help to know which new reps are risking missing email quota, right? The question kind of implies that you have a solution. And one thing that this framework doesn't necessarily show you when it comes to life is your signature line is going to be doing a lot of work for you. It's going to sit right below here, and it's going to say, email assistant, and it's going to say like what you do there, right? Like it does a lot. And so it makes you wonder, like, what is it actually doing there? But this is all it really needs to say. This is how you can get 25 words out the door and generate positive response. This is another first touch, my all-time sort of favorite framework. So you start with an observation. So, hey, I saw you were dealing with this thing, problem or insight based on that observation. Usually when I see that, it means either X or Y, provide credibility to speak to that. I know that because, we saw it when we started working with blank when they were around your size, lead into what you do to solve that problem. We solved it with our X. And then an interspace CTA, really a conversation starter. Curious, have you picked up a technology to start working on that already? Right? So here's another way I've written it out. So you're hiring for SDRs. I imagine you're thinking about how they'll ramp. Usually our customers focus training on phones, but email results lag. We're helping reps at Sendoso ramp faster. They continue improving with their in-inbox assistant or chat. Now, that doesn't fit in a tweet, but it is under 50 words, and it's written at a 6th grade reading level. Now, how did I get it there? I broke up these sentences every place I possibly could, right? This could easily be one sentence, but what I did was I put a little, I think in the UK, y'all refer to it as a full stop. First time I did an email coaching session, and I kept referring to it as a period. And he's like, what? And I was like, what are you talking about? Back and forth for probably 5 minutes. Anyways, put a full stop here. Capitalize but creates more visual emphasis for the person who is going to be scanning that email. This is easy to scan. It's not falling into any sort of like matchy patterns, right? Like it's not, hey George, I saw you're hiring for SDRs. Now I'll tell you, I don't have preference. Like you could do hi George, comma, enter, and like go down 2 lines. It doesn't matter. Honestly, not a big deal. Just wanted to show you there are no rules and you can do it differently. Now those are a couple first touches, follow-ups. I see a lot of folks want to like send a link to something, send a case study. Not a huge fan. If you look at like the data on that, your click-through rate's like 2%. And so with that, we have to think about where our conversions lie. And so if I know that my click-through on this article that I'm gonna send over is 2 to 3%, high end 10%, doing great. What's a higher conversion rate? My open rate or my click-through? Well, my open rate, right? And so what I want to do is bring to light what's actually going on in that article and why I sent it to them. So in this case, I really like the idea of bringing a neutral resource to the table because I'm biased. The buyer knows I'm biased. And so instead of saying like, hey, I'm biased, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going neutral. Hey, Will, do you read Outreach's blog? Great. That's like total like, I don't. Why? Then I reuse the original context for why I showed up. Hey, given you're hiring a bunch of sales reps right now, I thought you'd find this piece by yada yada really, really interesting because of the following reasons. Yeah. Hey, and by the way, let me know if my first email was like on point. That's all I have to say, right? Any thoughts on my last note? Another way to put that. And this is an email, by the way, I've used. And it's interesting. Doesn't get a huge reply rate. It's not like awesome in that regard. But when you throw it into a cadence, I've actually seen this firsthand. It like increases the reply rates of every other email by about 2 to 3% afterwards. And so, you go from like 9% to 12%. And so one of the things to recognize is like, it just like warms up the buyer. Not every email has to be like, come meet with me. So this is one that we probably all know and have grown to despise, which is like thoughts, or the new trend. Izzy, I'm following up with you, and it just says Izzy ? Nothing makes a buyer more angry than that. Like, I'm gonna tap into your urgency bone and just like pull you in, and then lie to you and be like, hey, by the way, it's just a sales email. Gotcha. They hate it. And so instead, start with the context. Like, and you can flip this, by the way, you can play around with it. George, hey, given your growing sales team, I thought this would be worth the discussion. Did you have any feedback on my note? Right? It's just a casual bump. One of the things that I'll do if like I haven't followed up in a while is I'll say, George, realizing this slipped through the cracks on my end. Given what I saw, I thought this would be a really relevant discussion. Did you have any feedback on my note? Or I can just start with, hey, George, did you have any feedback on my note? Given you're growing the sales team, thought it would be worth a discussion. It's just a little bit more thoughtful way to do the exact same thing. And buyers are appreciative. So another thoughtful bump could be just to clarify why you're reaching out. And this is really, I find works well with your more technical buyers. A lot of times, if they haven't responded off of that priority thing, they're looking to get a little flavor of what you do. And so you can rephrase the original framework that I showed you in that, like my favorite first touch there, which is, restating that context where you showed up. Here's what we do. Here's why that's relevant. And then try to open up a conversation. What I'm not doing is feature dumping and telling them all the great things that we do and like all the intricacies of how it's done. I never want to answer how it's done. I always want to say, Like, I always want to leave room for curiosity, right? Look at that middle paragraph, by the way. Thought I should clarify. Full stop. We've built a sales email coach. Full stop. Sits right inside their inbox. Full stop. Choppy copy works better than run-on sentences. So this is not terribly in depth about all the features and functionalities and anything. It's just a clearer recommendation of what we do to try to make it obvious as to why I reached out in the first place. Couple closers to your cadence. There's two ways you can really close this out. One is set yourself up to go talk to somebody else, and the other is just say like, okay, I missed the mark. This is really coming back to a core question of when I look at an email, I can do four things with it. I can do something, the greatest one being I can respond to it. Then I can delay. I've done this. I'm a horrible buyer. I'm so sorry to all of you. Where like I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Let me get back to that. It happens. The other one is delete. That also happens, right? Like, oh, this is automated. Bye. And then the last one is I can delegate it. And you see this within your open tracking all the time, where all of a sudden the number just starts ticking up and you're like, what happens? Why are they reopening my email? And what's happening is they forwarded it to somebody else. And when you see that, your immediate thought process should be, cool, who do I think they forwarded that message to? I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to explain why I want to go talk to them. So I'll say, hey, George, would Izzy be a better person to talk to about email coaching? Saw she likely manages tech from your careers page. Super simple, right? Now, there's an awesome bonus play that you can run up for this that I didn't include that I thought I might have, which is after that, I can go reach out to Izzy and I can say, hey, Izzy, did George forward you my email? I saw the following thing. It made me think the following thing. And so I wanted to see if that was top of mind for you. And now I've got a new cadence running. And so instead of having to follow up with George 18 trillion times, I'm now separating those 18 trillion outreaches across the entire account. Now, the breakup. I've seen terrible, terrible breakup emails, and they don't have to be terrible. The one key to this is your cadence strategy and where it sits. So like if it's touch point 18, I don't know if you really should be breaking up at that point. Like you're just talking to yourself. But if it's like touch point 4, it's kind of like a nice moment where you can say, hey, I reached out a few times. I thought this would be relevant. Guess I was wrong. No big deal, right? This is how I phrased it, and it works ridiculously well. Some things that I've done to spice this up, I've added GIFs to it. Now, caveat with GIFs, if you're using like, a cat that's like, please respond to me, like your buyer is just going to be like, get out of here. But if you use like a really dry, you're from the UK, you've got that nice dry humor, like put that to work, right? Where like, it's like, hey, I've reached out a few times, given you're hiring so many few reps, like I thought an email assistant could help. Like one GIF that we've used is a woman picking up the phone, and all it says is just, hey, bad time, right? It's super simple. It's not trying to be anything more than it really is. One of the things you have to recognize like a GIF is if you go really hard on a GIF, like it's going to overshadow the entire message. And there's a lot of like nuanced tonality in this, right? Which is like you being like, I'm still valuable is probably the biggest one. You saying, I kind of missed the mark, but I'm not that worried about it. And also being respectful of their time. And so as soon as you send like the, oh, woe is me, SDR GIF, you've shot that entire tone in the foot. And so that's why I call that out. The last sentence, I do want to point out, let me know if I'm wrong. is a phrase that you should be absolutely like, it's like salt. It goes great on everything. Works throughout the entire cadence. If I say, hey, correct me if I've got this all wrong. Yeah. I get these things wrong all the time. Let me know if this is just like totally off. Right. That kind of phrasing, it's not me saying like, I'm dumb. Like I did my homework, right? I did my research. But what it does is it opens them up to correct you. People love to correct people. It's great. And just you lean into that and take advantage of it. And it's good stuff for everybody.